Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be doing the first episode review of the Rings of Power Season 2. I'm going to be doing these in episodes, so I'm not going to do episodes 1 to 3 right now. I'm just going to focus on episode 1 and then do each episode as a different video. So grab a nice little hot drink. I'm having some chai tea today. So grab yourself a hot drink, and it's finally September so we can have hot drink. Let's get into the review. Okay, so we get into the episode with a shot of the helmet, and I think this might be the helmet of the future Sauron, the one that he wears in the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings films. So we're back in time here, and Sauron has a different face. This was because they actually shot this in the first season, and they didn't include this monologue from Sauron with Adar there, and all the orcs. They didn't include that in the first season, and they kept it now for the second season. So this is why Sauron has a different face, because the actors changed from that one to this one. They'll be on screen. Here, I think this is after Morgoth is gone and defeated, and Sauron is gone like hiding into Middle Earth and is trying to convince people that they should be on his side, and he's growing an army in Middle Earth. It's interesting here that Sauron is actually trying to manipulate the orcs, like they actually have free will and choice. This kind of humanizes the orcs, which they do later as well in another episode with an orc family, which was really weird. Not normally do we see in Tolkien's work, written or in the adaptations from Peter Jackson, that these orcs actually have kind of opinions and fears, and they are human. They just seem to be cannon fodder, and they're just armies, and we celebrate when they die, and we don't seem to care when they die. So that is interesting that they've done that in the show, and continue to actually do that in the show. They explore it quite a lot, which is very interesting, and it gives a lot more depth to these orcs as characters. So, what we see here after Sauron tries and fails to manipulate the orcs is that they butcher him horribly, and there was a lot of blood. It's extremely graphic, this scene, and I absolutely loved that. It was great. But it is stupid, I think, of the trailer, and it does this a lot, the trailer. I think it spoiled the reveal that they were going to betray Sauron, because we saw the flip of the helmet and the stab into the back of Sauron by Adar in that trailer. I think they could have kept that as a surprise so that we could have gone, what? No, he got backstabbed, literally. But they chose not to do that because they revealed it in the trailer, which I think was stupid. It's also interesting to point out here that Adar and Sauron, this fighting, this distrust between them and the orcs, this isn't actually in Tolkien's work. So this is new, and it's just something that the Prime Show has decided to do. Now, after Sauron has died, he explodes, and it becomes this like white, angelic, snowy mist that explodes everywhere. And I think this is what we're looking at when in the trailer, when it zooms out, and obviously on the episode when it zooms out and you see this tower in the snow. Now I think this is where Galadriel ends up in the first season when she's trying to find Sauron, because his last known sighting before he was assumed dead was there at the tower. So I think that what we're looking at here is that Sauron has died and created the frozen wasteland that we saw in the first season. Again, the orcs are shown after quite quickly to be curious and free thinkers. Are they like this though, I wonder? Because this is thousands of years in the, back in time before the events of Lord of the Rings. So I wonder if that is why these orcs are more human and free thinking. Maybe they haven't been melded and tortured enough to just be subservient slaves at this point. Now, the gloopy monster from the trailer, the little CGI gloopy monster, that's actually Sauron, who's turning into Halbrand. What he's doing is growing and learning, again through killing things. He kills a rat, a millipede, and then a peasant woman. Now, I think that after he kills the peasant woman, this is him learning how to project himself as the fair version of himself, or a human version in the form of Halbrand. I think he needed to kill the peasant woman, and she needed to die so he could learn the anatomy of how humans work, and because he was previously posing as an elf. So now he is posing as a human or man for the first time, or men. So now we see how Halbrand ends up at the ship in the Sundering Seas, because they show this transition from him finding some men and they're going off to the Sundering Seas to find a new life. However, what we see here is a good chat that alludes to Tolkien and how he actually wrote his characters. They're complex and they have depth. They're not one note, and nothing is pure evil, even in Tolkien's work. He doesn't suggest anything is totally purely evil. Sauron is noted that is the only thing to come close to being pure evil, but it's still not pure evil. So this chat with the man about choosing good, I think, is alluding to that on the ship, and which of course then gets broken up and attacked by the sea creature we saw in the first season. However, what we can see is that the evil of the world won't actually hurt Sauron or Halbrand, because the the sea monster kind of gets towards him and pivots off, which I found really interesting. Again, we see this again with the Orky wolf thing in the camp when Halbrand is trapped. So that ends our opening of the first season. Then we cut to Galadriel and Elrond. Now Galadriel's kind of chasing Elrond and is grabbing for this bag which contains the 3 rings. Now I was initially confused as to why they're chasing each other, because the last time we saw them is that, they all, with Celebrimbor, looked at the rings in awe and they were like, we've created something good here, including Elrond. Now, I think maybe after the reveal or the discovery that Halbrand is warned by Galadriel not to be trusted, maybe now that is why Elrond doesn't want them to use the rings and has kidnapped them, essentially, to take them to Gil-galad to show that they shouldn't be trusted, because Halbrand was warned by off, really, because of what Galadriel said. And I think with Elrond and his, gift of sight, I think he probably figured out that Halbrand is more worse. So what we then have is a meeting with Gil-galad and Elrond and Galadriel, and Galadriel is kind of forced to reveal to the High King that Halbrand is actually Sauron. So this gives more context behind the rings as to why Elrond doesn't want them to be wielded and used. Galadriel again mentions fair form being Halbrand because he's posing as a human, which he's not because he's Sauron, but obviously he fooled them all, including Galadriel. Elrond is actually worried here at the depth of influence Sauron has put into these rings, having worked with Celebrimbor for weeks and months, so he doesn't know, about how much influence Sauron's put into these rings, and he certainly doesn't trust them, the elves, to use these rings. He doesn't want them to be bent to the influence of Sauron. So, after a little squabble between Galadriel and Elrond, the High King wants the rings anyway, because they could be the last hope for Middle-earth and saving the elves from having to go back to Valinor. So Gil-galad says to Elrond that this isn't his decision to make, and he says that he's not even asking him, he's now commanding Elrond to give over the rings, which Elrond doesn't do because he instead jumps off of a cliff, which was so cool, and it did look great. It looked great. But he took the rings with him, so that Gil-galad and Galadriel do not have the rings at this point. Then we cut back to Adar, and he is described by one of the orcs as the Lord Father of the Orcs. So Adar has captured the Southland men and women, wants them to swear allegiance to Adar, to himself, and get branded with that Sauron's helm sigil that we see from the first series. And if they do agree, they get bent over and branded, so that they are confirmed to be with Adar and not with elves or men. They've also, here we see that Halbrand has allowed himself to be captured, and he asks them, weirdly, to let his people go, which I think they technically are his people anyway. If they were against the elves in the first war, they were on Sauron's side then, or what's his name, Morgoth's side, so they technically are his people. But it's interesting that he cares enough to actually ask Adar to let them go rather than keep them there to be tortured. Maybe he's wanting to recruit them again as more of his army. Again, we see this power over flesh line come up, and it's said, and it's on about the rings and how Sauron is using them to control flesh, as in control and influence the people that wear the rings. Again, we see this humanizing version of orcs here, because the orcs are fearing Sauron's return, and Adar has assumed Sauron's dead and is trying to reassure them that Sauron is dead and he's not coming back. But Halbrand kind of keeps himself alive by saying, I know where Sauron is, or I know a little information about Sauron. Of course he does, because he is him. Then we cut to the stranger, who is now talking, and he's with Nori, and they are in this kind of desert landscape. But the stranger's having a dream in the desert, and he's looking for the star system. Whilst being watched by Syrian Hinds, which is playing this dark wizard character, and the actor of that is Dumbledore's brother, Aberforth. He's a dark wizard in this anyway, and he doesn't want the stranger to reach his full potential. Nori is homesick as well, and there's a nice little touching bonding moment for the two of them, Nori and the stranger, when they bond over a campsite and eating bugs and stuff. But then they notice they're being followed, so they put out their flame. Then it cuts to what we see is the opening or introduction to Círdan. He is teaching the elves in Lindon in the Grey Heavens, and Elrond has gone to seek out his wisdom and his advice on what to do about the 3 rings. So actually, I think it's really nice to note here that within Círdan's introduction, it's so beautiful, the cinematography, that lush kind of pink sunset, and the music, the elves music that they've used in the Rings of Power, which I really love. So Elrond seeks him out because he's the oldest and wisest. And then we cut back to Gil-galad, who is trying to send a messenger to inform Celebrimbor that Halbrand is actually Sauron. It's just too bad that the message never gets to him, as Halbrand, I believe, kills them before he goes to Eregion himself. It's also interesting here that Gil-galad is actually out for Elrond. He's hunting him down because he wants these rings. He's expanding the search. He wants the rings back and doesn't want Elrond to escape. So Galadriel says that Elrond wants to destroy the rings, not to escape. She says that he sought out someone older and wiser than Gil-galad, which is Círdan. So their search now turns to Lindon in the Grey Heavens. So then we cut then back to like nighttime, and Círdan is thinking that the rings haven't been touched by Sauron, so there's no need for Elrond to worry. Elrond asks him to destroy the rings, but Círdan says how that will end the Age of the Elves. It's here he decides, I believe, not to destroy them, but begins to tell Elrond how he might be able to destroy these rings. But they are interrupted by the arrival of Gil-galad and Galadriel, and Galadriel wants Elrond then to see sense, trust in the rings. Galadriel is sure the rings are free from Sauron's influence, but Elrond questions Galadriel as to if she herself is free from Sauron's influence, free from Halbrand. I think this is interesting because obviously in The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings we see that even when she wears the ring, she's still being tested by Sauron. The ending of the first season, where we had that epic kind of Galadriel Sauron back forth, where he was on about her being the dark and beautiful queen, which obviously she says in the Lord of the Rings movies. So we know that Galadriel is still tested even wearing these rings, and we know that she is not completely free from his influence. And I don't think she really ever is until he's destroyed and she goes back to Valinor. So then Galadriel then questions where the rings are because Elrond doesn't have them, and Círdan is in a boat and he's sailing away from Lindon in nighttime. So he's now got the rings and Elrond doesn't. Then we cut back to the stranger with Nori. They've set a trap for whoever is following them, and I found this to be funny because it's Poppy, so she is back. We didn't see her in the trailers. And I mean, I didn't watch the third one, maybe she was in that one, but I didn't see her in the teaser or the first proper trailer from the San Diego one, so it was nice to see Poppy's return for me. Okay, we're back, and my phone died, so I'm not going to rely on recording on my phone, and I'm not sure where I got to, so I'm just going to carry on for where I got to on my notes. So Poppy has come back after them because, of course, as Sam couldn't be without Frodo, Poppy cannot seem to be without Nori, and I think that's cute, and I think that these two are so... Sam and Frodo, it's so good. I love it, and I like it because it feels Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, even if we have Nori and Poppy now rather than Sam and Frodo. It's nice. Also, let's just be real. The Stranger feels very Gandalf. It feels very Gandalf, Frodo, and Sam, and I like it, and it's nice to see. So Poppy has shown up with a map, which is now their salvation because previously Nori and the Stranger seemed to be lost. So Poppy's here, and she says that the Half-Foot song, the walking song, that's the directions because their people walked for ages, so they made the song, which is actually telling them how to navigate through this desert. This is a really charming scene, and I think it makes you smile. It made me smile so much. It's just lovely. I think it's so nice to have these moments because I think a lot of it is serious, which I also like, but it's also nice to have these charming, cute moments as well, which the Hobbits have always kind of provided, and so has now the Half-Foots. Okay, so the star system is then revealed, and I believe it is revealed to be Rune, which I think is pretty cool. The Stranger has been here before, he says, but in dreams only, which is quite obvious because he fell from the sky, so I don't imagine he's been to Rune before. Then we cut back to Círdan, and he goes to drop off the rings in the water, because we saw him in the boat heading out to wherever he was going to destroy the rings, I suppose, or maybe throw them in the water so that they get lost. But now, when he's there, he is stopped by something that kind of hits the boat, and as he does this, it kind of makes Círdan look at these rings, and when he looks at the rings, I don't think he's been influenced by them or Sauron here, but it is interesting that he looks at these rings and then it kind of has a moment of realization that these are actually the elves' salvation and the way to prolong them and keep going so they don't have to leave Middle-earth. At least just not yet. So here I think is interesting. Maybe here Galadriel, Gil-galad and Círdan are all influenced. At this point, they're the only three that don't want the rings to be destroyed and they want to use them to restore the elves. And Elrond's the one going against this idea. So then we come back to Adar in the camp with Halbrand, his old bestie Sauron, and here Adar is actually revealing some information, saying that there was 13 chosen, blessed at Morgoth's hand, with the promise of power. Adar was one of those 13, and we know that Sauron was, because Sauron was the second in command as a lieutenant. basically more important, I believe, than these 13. So Adar was betrayed by Morgoth, chained up and left. There, he saw Morgoth's servant's face, Sauron's face, which he then calls beautiful. And here it's actually really interesting because Adar says that Sauron offered wine and drank the wine with him, and that kind of bonded the two. And then Adar says that Halbrand's people have been freed. So now Halbrand can tell him what he knows about Sauron. And here I think we see a longing within Adar. He wants Sauron, but he doesn't. It's interesting. It's a toxic relationship between Adar and Sauron, and boy, if I had a few of those to know how that could go. Halbrand here is manipulating and toying with Adar to let him go, convince him to let him go, and he says he knows a little information about Sauron, which is that he's returned, but in a different form, as in the guy right in front of you. So Adar is now worried that Sauron has returned. Anyway, as promised, Adar's let the people go, and then lets Halbrand go. For some reason, he just lets Halbrand go. So Halbrand is off, and he's off to Eregion, but Adar orders an orc to follow his every step. So I guess we're being tracked. Well, Halbrand's being tracked anyway. Then we cut to Adar is now worried that Sauron's returned, and we really are seeing fully fleshed out villains here, I think, and we're like giving them personality, worries, and feelings. We're seeing almost a longing, as I say in Adar, a fondness for Sauron, which I think is really interesting. Okay, then we come back to the High King, Gil-galad, and he is singing, which I actually thought was really nice, and he's singing in front of their dead tree. And the tree has dropped its last leaf. Their time in Middle-earth has come to an end, and they have admitted this now. Finally, the elves have admitted to themselves that they can no longer stay in Lindon. But Círdan shows up at the last minute wearing the red ring, which is called Narya, I think, and this is the Ring of Fire. So for a little background on these three rings, because they are important, if you don't know, because I didn't, so I had to look them up a little bit. So Narya is the Ring of Fire, which then gets passed on to Gandalf by Círdan, and then Gandalf then takes the Ring of Fire off with him to Valinor, the Undying Lands. So the one that Galadriel ends up with is called Nenya, which is the Ring of Water, and she then takes that back with her after she goes back to Valinor or the Undying Lands. And the last one is called Vilya, so that's the Ring of Air, and Gil-galad wears Vilya, but he obviously dies, and when he dies, it is given to Elrond, who doesn't like these rings, but I guess he has it himself. Well, at the moment, he doesn't like them. So Elrond then takes that back over to the sea when he goes to. So the three rings that were first started by Celebrimbor all eventually go back to Valinor at some point, but not right now. Otherwise, we wouldn't have a TV show to dissect. So Círdan shows up right in the nick of time wearing Narya, the red ring, and he says that Celebrimbor has brought their salvation to Middle-earth. In the form of these rings forged via Mithril from Khazad-dûm. Elrond once again is a little bit of a bummer again, and he's saying that he just tries to stop this. He says no, which makes Gil-galad for some reason jump a mile and drop the rings. Now the rings, cascade down the steps towards Galadriel, and Nenya is the one that falls in front of Galadriel, who picks it up and puts it on. Also, I think at this point, it's only been the first episode, but honestly, Elrond has become tiresome. I'm really beginning to find him a little bothersome. I know he's right not to trust the rings to some extent, but we know that the elves are wielding them from the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit films for a very long time, and I kind of wish that Elrond would stop being so against it in this first episode, especially since he's the one that ends up wielding Vilya himself. So, as I say anyway, Galadriel does put the ring on, and she puts it on her middle finger, and I also don't think that the design of Nenya here is the one that they used in the Hobbit or Lord of the Rings films. For reference, you can see the pictures down below or around me, and you can see that they are not the same design, which I think is a bit of annoying, because it's like slightly messing with continuity, and feels like these rings are totally different from the ones that do come, and they're in the same world. I know it's Prime versus the ones that Peter Jackson made, but it is still the same world, and I think they could have just done the same design. So that's just a little thing that isn't bothering me, at least, anyway. So Gil-galad wears Vilya, and Círdan's got Narya, and Galadriel's got Nenya. And all three of them have that shot from the trailer when they all come together with their hands and they're like, ooh, these rings are good. And especially here, after this shot now, this is quite a beautiful scene where we see the world around them glows this golden sunset color, and the tree comes back to life and it like blooms again and it glows so fiery and bright, literally like a star on top of that cliff. And it's such a beautiful shot too. And I think it actually looks like the trees that we saw from Valinor. I think that's the whole point of these rings, that they've brought the Elven realms back to life. And Linden has now been restored. Elrond can now shut up, and for a second his face is gobsmacked before he gives Galadriel a stern look and walks off in a sulk. Because it is too late for Elrond, the three elves are now wearing these rings. The episode then ends with Celebrimbor in a new forge, and Halbrand Sauron has turned up wanting to negotiate, which is what he said when he turned up with Adar and was like, I want to negotiate. So he's doing a lot of negotiating in this episode after being butchered. But Celebrimbor, having been warned off of Halbrand by Galadriel, is unsure about letting him in. Now, I think it's interesting as well that in these episodes, they mention that if you've been influenced and let Sauron in, it is hard to kind of let that go, which we see with Adar and his longing for Sauron again. And also we then see with Galadriel when Elrond has said, oh, are you sure that you're free from influence? These rings might be, but you certainly aren't. And again, with Celebrimbor, he worked with Halbrand, so he did also let Sauron in and is sort of to some extent under his influence now. So when Celebrimbor is looking at Halbrand and he's being told not to trust him, there is also this longing again within Celebrimbor, and I don't think he's planning on making rings, and he certainly doesn't know that Halbrand isn't the king that he's pretending to be, because at this point, remember, Celebrimbor hasn't got the message from Gil-galad that Halbrand is actually Sauron. So all Celebrimbor knows is that Halbrand is not to be trusted, but he doesn't know why at this point. And I guess he is wondering about the success of the rings he made, and he is obviously putting that down to Halbrand's help, and I guess he wants to continue the success he's got, which is why he doesn't completely turn Halbrand away. But more on that on a different episode, because that concludes the end of episode 1. Now, obviously, I've seen the first 3, and I won't go into spoilers in case you guys haven't watched the first episode, although it has been 2 weeks, so if you haven't watched it by now, I don't know when you plan on doing it. But I think that this episode was a really good episode, really good introduction back to the series. So yeah, I think this was a really good first episode. Here we obviously don't get the dwarfs or the men storylines because they come in episode 2 and 3, but it's a good setup again, because the season 1 really was, whilst it had action and whilst it was good, it was predominantly a setup to the Rings of Power being created, and now we're seeing the fallout of that, the ethics, the should we wear them, should we not wear them. Elrond is firmly against when everyone else seems to be for, and that does play in the next episodes as well. Okay, I think I'll stop talking now about these episodes and let you guys watch it. Let me know your thoughts down below. If you have any thoughts about these episodes, if I've missed anything, let me know. If the research I've done into the lore of this world is out somewhat, let me know, let me inform me. Inform me, so that I can know, so that I could do better. Yeah, I think that was a good episode. I'm glad that we're back in the Lord of the Rings territory, and it feels right because it's September and we can all be cozy and watch our Lords of the Rings with our hot drinks and enjoy this second season. Okay, I will see you in the next one then. Bye.